Pandemic Artbook. Creating in a pandemic speaks and performs to a global audience. In the past, intertextual echoes of one's life experience were woven into a creation. The poet talked to an invisible listener whose response the poet could not hear. Thus, creation was a lonely act. COVID-19 unleashed new pathways of thinking. In this mass media mall, the writer, the Instagrammer, has become the customer, both creator and audience. They hear themselves talking. Cultural massification is the noise of the agora. The writer in the marketplace becomes susceptible to misinterpretation, their words manipulated by the collective unconscious, within which social and historical connotations are embedded. Thus, the creative act is usurped. In social media comments, creative ideas are ingested as if they were one's own. Cyber thieves pick up and remember word tags. This cyber heist expands original ideas by using synonyms, sucking the poet's blood. Once in the public sphere, the message becomes the myth believed. Piracy of emotions becomes their birthright. Now that they have assimilated the concepts, they think they are the masters of their mother tongue, vampires of a new artistic language, when, in fact, the commodified emotions within that language are simply transformed meta-consumption, false commodities of thinking. It boggles the mind of the original creator. Communication is no longer possible. Enervation plays on the phatic stage. Social contact becomes a layer of small talk in order to appease the fear and anger of the cyber hijacker. How easily one could give up on the transaction. The pull of isolation, of the wild, of the hermitage, of refuge from the commercialization of art becomes strong and seemingly inevitable. But this pandemic art book is a call from an isolated poet to a silent art lover whose response does not have to be heard, if such is their wish. It is a call for indulgence, for an allowance to be lent an ear. This global pandemic positions us to speak and perform as curators and witnesses to our common humanitas, our shared kind. A curator opens the mind door and lets the life art in. A witness testifies to its authenticity. Upside of agoraphobia in pandemic. I wrote this essay on March 2020 as an initial reaction to the pandemic. It was published in the Prairie Journal of Canadian Literature, issue 74, October 2020. For nearly 7 years, since my retirement from teaching, I have struggled with agoraphobia. The only times I would go out with sunglasses on were for groceries and medical appointments when my son would take me in the car. That's 2 distancing shields to begin with, sunglasses so that figures are dark or blurry, and a car as metallic obstacle. The only other times were for invited readings of my literary work, when I would do my bit and run off. I made myself go to a restaurant for literary interviews, but it was so difficult to interact with the other person that I cancelled other events. While inside my 4th floor condo unit, I had to fill my alone time with creative work in order to keep up my sanity. I divided the hours with the following: painting, as my son helped me stock up, with art supplies, learning a language with books I had bought when I was still working but had no time to study, writing as the muse hit me, reading, walking inside for 15 minutes from kitchen, living room, hallway, walking around the building at a dark hour when no one would be around, dancing to YouTube music, singing along to foreign songs online, Skyping with my daughter, chatting with my sister over the phone, emailing dear friends, relearning the guitar, playing mind games, binge watching television shows in all genres, watching news programs. Photography being my first love, I took pictures of the outside world from my windows. From the dining room, I watched the house built across the back street. That took a year. From my living room, I watched people walking by and the traffic whiz by on the major road fronting my unit. And here we are at the reason why I became agoraphobic. As an educator, I was immersed in social contact. As soon as I retired, I did the usual things some retirees planned to do: take short trips abroad, learn a language at a local school, have lunches with friends, walk in the neighborhood. That last activity is what did me in. This neighborhood was new to me after having been renovicted from my city apartment. Now I was surrounded by strip malls, roaring cars, trucks, first responders, vehicles, sirens every day. I would walk to the grocery or the pharmacy amid their rumbling and shrieking as my heart pounded against my ears and chest. After a year of this pollution, I locked myself in. The consequence of this action is mental health issues. Although I found creative ways to hang on, social isolation is devastating. Little by little, I forget how to talk to people, what to say, what not to say. I see behavior, tics, gestures I had taken for granted, and apply certain analyses on them that make me want to be a hermit. Do I like humans, after all? On the other hand, having been agoraphobic for so long has toughened me in this pandemic. I don't have to go outside. I don't want to. I found a life inside. Perhaps we are moving towards that virtual reality sci-fi writers envision. Hey, why not? Cortical geography. The place takes you in the stream of memories, in the childbirth, in the bone, in the sinews, in the skin. The white care home sheet covers you, mother womb layered in dark blood, storage of fragments and word shards. The dead awaken with confabulation, distorted engrams dismembered in retrieval, recomposed in altered consciousness. As devastation sweeps across the mindscape, your being reveals itself in absence, trace fossils in enduring sediment. Neurons. Thin edges move and the mother's eyes roll out of the frame. Silver key. Where the spirit drinks, where the mother sleeps, a drowsy child in flowers, the brain goes wild among 1,000 fears, a silver key unlocking tears. Phinder Dulai's latest collection of poetry, Dream Arteries, was published by Talon Books in October 2014. Soul Journey to the End of the Pacific, a Komagata Maru archive, is part of this collection. Recently, Dulai took part in the Interventions Literary Residency at the Banff Centre for the Arts. His most recent poetry is published in a number of journals: Canadian Literature, Offerings, and Q Books Anthology. His previous work has been published in Anchor, Matrix, Mimi War Magazine, Rung, the Capilano Review, Canadian Ethnic Studies, Toronto South Asian Review, Subterrane, and West Coast Line. He is a co-founder of the Surrey-based interdisciplinary arts group, the South Fraser Inter-Arts Collective, and is the author of 2 previous poetry books, Ragas from the Periphery and Basmati Brown. He has given readings and talks on Canadian literature with an emphasis on migrant voices for schools, colleges, and universities, both in and outside of Canada. He has worked in print journalism in Vancouver's South Asian media and as an associate producer for Gabbro Live. Excerpts of his poetry have been featured in the Vancouver Sun and the Globe and Mail. He lives in Surrey, BC. Phinder Dulai, Sleepwalking. I hear the murmur, the blade scratching against the throat. Curved toes, arched high, an imprint on a leaf. Toward the dawn. Breathe, breathe. Review of Dusk to Dawn. This book rains down overwhelming blessings. This is not a list of poets. This is us. Our common humanity connects our thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. It doesn't matter whether we're from all over India, Canada, Bulgaria, Germany, South Africa, Turkey, Mongolia, Wales, Israel. We are one. The poems embrace all the nuances of his genre, from a demanding ghazal to the freedom of rhythmic, melodic, syncopated expression. These flow like lifeblood into our veins, lungs, brains. So enriching are they that if the pandemic had crushed us, we are regenerated not just by English, Hindi, or Urdu words, but also by the cosmic spirit that binds us. How fortuitous that the editors, Dr. Chandra Mohan, Dr. Rita Malhotra, and Anamika, brought 47 poets writing in English, 44 in Hindi, and 4 in Urdu together to complete the task, began by Dr. H.K. Kaul, former chief librarian at the India International Center in Delhi, and himself a poet who passed away of COVID. That this volume is dedicated lovingly to Dr. Kaul, who envisioned the strength that would carry us beyond the pain through the practice of art, is as beautiful as the final result. Dusk to Dawn, Poetic Voices on the Current Times, South Asia and Beyond, is a necessary book to be kept in our homes, wherever we are in this one world of ours, for the good it brings. Rita Malhotra's poem, Mask, was published in Dusk to Dawn, Poetic Voices in the Current Time, South Asia and Beyond, the 2021 anthology she co-edited with Dr. Chandra Mohan and Anna Mika. Dr. Rita Malhotra is a National Science Talent Scholar and National Scholarship Awardee by the Ministry of Education, GOI. She's a mathematician, poet, essayist, and translator. Former principal, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi, and postdoctoral fellow, University of Paris. She's currently president, Poetry Across Cultures India, poetry editor, Ars Artium, and executive committee member, Poetry Society, India. Her research papers are published in 10 countries, including Sweden, Germany, and South Korea. She has authored 2 mathematics books, 9 poetry books, a collection of literary essays, co-translated poets, translated French poets, and her recognitions include Honorary Diploma of the World Congress of Poets in 2019, Distinguished Visionary Poet Award by Writers International Network Canada 2013, among other honors. Her literary compositions are translated into 13 languages. And she has delivered talks at literary meets in different countries and has been an invited delegate at poetry meets in Taiwan, China, Canada, Nicaragua, Romania, Serbia, Australia, and the USA. She has also chaired technical sessions and delivered keynote addresses at several conferences. Rita Malhotra, Mask. A house on the river, tattooed waves lap at the door. Red grass smiles tall, sunrise brushstrokes paint purple. Diamonds glitter on noon's proud chest. Radiant peacocks open petals, winged dahlias in twilight bloom. The earth bathes in a rain of stars. Gardens grow on verdant clouds. Nights burn in silver showers. Smiles sketched in shadows of fear. Infinity in finite's womb. Chirping birds perched on the moon. Rainbow across the night sky. All unseen, all unheard. Beneath the masked surface. Consolation for Surjit, 27 January 2021, Coventry, England. Under the shadow of its wings, I should rejoice, lest I fall into inordinate grief. After the spun out journey, the ash rain descends to shimmer like glory. Rainbow rings around the dark. In deep woe, the spectre of the broken looms larger than the beloved, magnifies a narcissus. Under the shadow of its wings, the living and the dead, and I should scatter like the dust motes that we are. March 24, 2021. Do not open this door, outbreak in progress, says the sign past my stretcher for day surgery in the OR. I have a massive headache, says one nurse to a colleague as I'm back from the high acuity unit to the recovery room. I need a break, says the nurse to another in the hallway as she wheels me to my son in P1 number 392. How can I relieve their pain? Cyril Dabydeen is a fixture in Canadian literature for decades and continues to garner awards. A Life of Crows is included in Dusk to Dawn Poetic Voices in the Current Times South Asia and Beyond 2021. Cyril Dabydeen is a noted Canadian poet, short story writer, novelist, and anthologist. His latest of 20 books include My Undiscovered Country, God's Spider, My Multi-Ethnic Friends, and Imaginary Origins, New and Selected Poems. His novel, Drums of My Flesh, is a Guyana Prize winner and was nominated for the Impact Dublin Prize. Cyril's work has appeared in over 60 literary anthologies, for example, Poetry, the Critical Quarterly, Canadian Literature, and the Oxford, Penguin, and Heinemann Books of Caribbean Verse. He's included in Singing in the Dark, an anthology of lockdown poems, Penguin Random House 2020. He juried for Canada's Governor-General's Award, Poetry, and the Neustadt International Prize for Literature, the University of Oklahoma. He taught writing at the University of Ottawa for many years. He is Guyana-born of Indian origin. Cyril Dabydeen, A Life of Crows. Whoever we may have become, watching the crows circling the house and making loud, cawing noises. A caterwaul, believe me, sounds for whoever else is listening. As my neighbor said, it's only about those dying. He would take his dog outside and look out for everyone. What the crows know best, birds' ways no less. Or it's about something else, as ethologists like Conrad Lawrence couldn't tell. Words left unsaid about my neighbor Manuel, long gone, broken by illness. Crows looking over now. Curated Children. This essay was published in Prairie Journal of Canadian Literature in November 2021. When the 1948 polio epidemic hit Manila, my mother pulled me out of kindergarten for 1 year. Thus, I never learned social skills needed to go through life. She said I had asthma, but was never given any treatment for it, and made me spend most of my days in bed, reading an enormous amount of children's books she stacked up on the headboard. She would lie down beside me and guide me through the reading until I could do it on my own. Big, fat, colorfully illustrated books on animals, Grimm's fairy tales, Disney adaptations. Quote, "Today's a day of the great mouse ball," unquote. That first line was permanently imprinted on my brain, making the writing I was to do 5 years later focused on the importance of first lines. Spending most of my days in bed fired up my imagination. When I did get up, I was allowed to run around freely in our backyard. It was limited space obstructed by a tennis table under one large tree only my older sister could climb, from which she subsequently fell off to hit the side of the table and lose a few teeth. There was so much blood it left nothing to the imagination and made me want to climb trees once I got older. She was rushed to emergency, stitched up, and scarred. As the epidemic worsened in the city, my father decided to move us out into what was called New Manila, an exurb outside of restrictive medical measures. He bought a large house with an enormous garden after a successful business deal selling airplanes to the government. There I did roam freely, using dried papaya leaf stems as pirate swords, hiding in bushes, building tiny pieces of furniture from bits of wood and clay. I found a slab of stone on which I would declaim memorized lines from more books now gathered in my father's library as another year passed by. Seven now, I was enrolled in an all-girls Catholic elementary school run by Spanish nuns in the old neighborhood, driven back and forth through a still war-torn Manila, denied adequate reconstruction funds by American allies. One classmate was a survivor of the polio epidemic. She went about in leg braces, managing to hang on day after day in the Philippine heat, an amazing sight glinting in the sun during recess and the lunch hour. I would watch her limp, wondering what it was like to live like that for the rest of her life. She wasn't one of the popular children, so I would spend time with her, but she had little to say, and I lacked the skills to draw her out. We sat in mutual quietude, soaked in our singular loneliness. The school had a tense atmosphere, our movements much restrained by the nuns. Mothers were around a lot, adding to the monitoring of our activities. Of course, my mother was there as much as she could be and made me join a poetry competition in which we had to recite memorized poems of our choosing. While I could remember lines at our garden, public recital unnerved me, and I forgot the last bits and lost first place. This made her look at the school with penetrating eyes like a studied museum painting. A tiny afflicted girl, dusty playing field, white-garbed nuns who judged my memory loss harshly. What, second place? Details she clearly found wanting. While sitting with another hovering woman waiting for the last school bell, she discovered there was a better school nearby with black-garbed nuns run by Americans. There were no polio survivors in this school. The chosen few girls were healthy and wealthy. The classes were so small one got to know classmates intimately. Even someone like me learned how to converse and play with others because there was no escaping socialization in such close quarters. Supplies were more accessible, even though these came from the children's parents, as the country was still hampered by political wartime acts that curtailed educational grants. We came to school sharing and exchanging art materials. Some had more than others, but there was a generous, unspoken understanding that money flowed like a river from bank to bank. Ultimately, it was inexhaustible because we knew the foundation had been laid by our ancestors, solid ground that would see us through adulthood. This sense of entitlement gnawed on me, having come from that other school of the one extraordinary survivor of an epidemic that still raged among us, whose end did not seem imminent to me. The Salk vaccine had yet to be discovered. The iron lung machines were not ample, and even if they were, poor people could not get to a hospital to use them. Although I was among girls who would, indeed, one day grow up to be the country's movers, as wives of the boys who were at the equally fortunate Jesuit-run elementary school, or as their own inherited favored positions, the more sensitive of us shared and exchanged similar traits. We were aware of our predicament from the ages 5 to 9, from the years 1948 to 1952, even if it was subtle and subducted. We picked it up from our parents, who organized our every action. We learned to be very clean, private, quiet. We hid our possessions from public view. We hid. We learned to be apocryphal, as in the Greek apocrypha, hideaway. We decided our ideas and ideals behind closed doors, keeping the fears and anxieties inside, away from the commons. We accepted boundaries and limitations for our protection. We drew lines against a diseased world and lived within our parents' selected space. Our collected fragments became sacred in liminal territory. No one could understand us except our own few with whom we had experienced the same ambiguities. We concealed our desires and grew frustrated. We revealed our sadness only in our eyes and hesitant smiles. Curated, we stayed hanging on the gallery wall or installed on the gallery floor, distant and untouchable. In 2021, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, I listened to the sound of children's voices in full energy at recess, drifting across our Burnaby Mountain refuge, while my sister tells me over the phone that poor people in the Philippines cannot afford to pay for vaccines. Should those not be free, I ask, shocked. Virtual touch. This poem was read at the University of Delhi COVID conference, March 12, 2021. Virtual touch is the early morning dew fainting onto violet petals that float on a watery world, where the foam on its waves vanishes into fog, and there it burns. It burns off like an etude, stripping air off lungs, while it lingers, its droplets filling time and space. Gasping, I hold out my hand, which once you clasped into yours, and now to nothing. Morning faints into a day of fierce sunlight, burning eyes reflecting an empty stage, the poet's voice gone silent, like dead lilies beside an urn. The theater divides as you walk away into shade, and perhaps you turn as you hear a faint thud in the wings. But beginning begins 1,000 hours again. This morning burns dew-kissed red orchids, shattering, scattering in the wind, as I, fading, draw the curtain on the sun. This pandemic has focused our attention on what we love more. What we love more. In the white-hot midwinter of a migrant's life, rage savages the sunlit ice down to covered rock, like the hammer of northern gods, and splits its head from which dreams scud across shadows. The memory of a beloved, loved soul and streams and brown mountains, yellow bones of childhood, gone and done now. But what we love more through the blinding fog are roots that spring out like hands from cracked earth, with soil encircling gently kissed raindrops, nurturing primroses that shudder into meaning, where earth and heaven are received, when time and eternity are reconciled, and all the seasons restored.